Hazreen and Lectures. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Today, inshallah, is our second lecture in the series that we have titled The Pursuit and Practice of Ihsan. And yesterday, we started talking about our topic. We started by actually looking at our role models for this life of Ihsan that we talk about. And we said that in the lives of the Ahlul Bayt, we find that they have all the qualities of Ihsan that we aspire to just learn about, think about. And some of those qualities are, we said that hasana or the root word has come many times in the Quran. It has many different meanings. It's a very difficult word to translate into English. Why? Because it includes goodness, it includes piety, it includes virtue, it includes excellence, it includes kindness. Right? So one word in English does very little to justify this, and yet the language is such that we have to make do, right? So we translate it usually as goodness, but just as long as we know that there is a lot more to the idea of ihsan, of husn, then we can translate into English. So we talked about that. We also talked about how the verse that we started with, where Allah tells us to act in accordance with adl and ihsan, right? So we said the difference between adl and ihsan is, the meaning of adl is putting things in their place, doing what is required, giving people their rights, and it's a very high standard. It's not that it's a low standard, it's a very high standard, and ihsan requires even more from us. Ihsan requires that we do more than what is required, that we give more than what is people's due, and that we deal with them. And when we think about our faith, it is one which is, if you were to describe the faith of Islam in one word, it would be rahmah. And when we deal with people with rahmah, it's a very different experience than dealing with people just on the basis of what is due to them. And we gave examples of teachers, doctors, anyone who is in the service industry, who does more than is required. We would say that they live a life of ihsan and not just adl. Okay. And we said that, we start with our Creator, who is Ahsanul Khaliqeen. He is the best Creator, He is the most excellent Creator. He has created us with He has created everything, right, with the idea of ihsan. He has perfected everything, okay? And we said He has created the human beings as ahsanu taqweem, which means what? That we have been created with everything that we need in order to pursue and practice this life of ihsan, okay? And then we went on to say that this is a potential that all of us have it, and since Allah has done this ihsan on us by giving us creation, by perfecting our forms, by giving us everything that we need in order to live our full potential, what is the response of the human being? The response of the human being is that we should deal with ihsan, with husn, with our most excellent of qualities in response to this ihsan that Allah has done. However, no matter how much ihsan a human being does, we need to know who we are dealing with. We just can't measure up, right? So if we do a drop, He gives us the ocean. And all of us, when we talk about this today a lot more, inshallah, but in our lives, we have all experienced this. We have experienced when we do a little thing, just a little thing, we may not even remember it, we may not think about it, it's done, it's forgotten, it's so tiny. And what we experience just in this world as a result of that deed is far, far greater than what we expect. So can we even begin to imagine the husn, the ihsan that He has left for us in the hereafter, right? He tells us again and again in the Quran, you do this, I will not deal with you with justice. I will deal with you with the best of what you have done. Okay, so this is the groundwork that we laid yesterday in order to start our topic from today. And as I mentioned yesterday, sometimes the first majlis is a bit theoretical. We need to understand some concepts, right? We need to lay the groundwork from which we can carry on. So now let's start with our topic for today. The verse that we have chosen for reflection is a very famous verse that all of us are familiar with. It comes from Surah Isra, Surah Bani Israel, and it is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In Ahsantum, Ahsantum li-anfusikum. Every single one of us is familiar with this verse, right? What does it mean? It means when you do ihsan, when you work with ihsan, and again it's very difficult to translate this, so we just use the word ihsan. You do it for yourself. You do it for your own selves. And so today, inshallah, this will be our focus of discussion, of reflection. And so some of the things we're going to be talking about is what does this exactly mean? We understand it definitely that, when you do something good, Allah will reward you, right? But we really want to deepen our understanding of what that means. Because sometimes we just think, oh, sawab, something that we get in the hereafter. No, what we're going to be talking about is how our lives can transform on this plane of existence, in this world, when we work with ihsan, right? So mental, physical, emotional and spiritual benefits, okay? Secondly, how do our relationships improve? So we're always going to be talking about relationships, right? And so how can our relationships completely transform? And in that we will really focus on, so we'll have many other sessions on this as well, but today inshallah what we focus on is what is the adab of doing ihsan? What is the adab? What have some of the, what are some of the recommendations? What are some of the ahadith? Like what's the point by point? What's the checklist? Okay? And then, how do we respond when ihsan has been done to us? Very important, right? Because obviously if we are doing ihsan, somebody is receiving it, right? So when we are on the receiving ends of ihsan, how do we deal with that? And how do we know who to do ihsan towards? Is it just general? Do we just, do acts of kindness to everyone? Do we pick and choose? How do we choose? And then, inshallah, I don't think we'll come to it today, but tomorrow, very importantly, we will discuss what are the limits of ihsan. Do we stop somewhere, or do we just, what are some of the ways we know, what, this is not something that I should be doing right now. So let's first talk about when we do ihsan, we do it for ourselves, right? So although this verse is initially addressed to the Bani Israel, in it Allah reveals a very important principle of creation, right? What is the principle of creation? Exactly this, that when you do ihsan, you do it for yourself. So what this means is that the effect of the deeds, by the way, and the verse goes on to say, and when you do evil, you do it for yourself as well, right? And it's very interesting, Allah always starts with the positive. So here's what will happen if you do this. This is the recommended action. And if you choose to do something else, then this will. What this means is that we always have a freedom of choice. Okay? Human beings choose their action. However, we do not choose the consequences of our action. What does this mean? So imagine, let's take physical laws, for example. So if we throw a ball up, what's going to happen to it?
Come down.
It will always come down. It will not sometimes fly off the side, right? Why? Because that's the law of physics that Allah has created. So we can count on the fact that if we throw a ball up, unless there's a really big wind or something, acting on it, we can count on the fact that the ball will come down, okay? In physical things, we take this almost for granted, right? We don't really argue with it. However, when it comes to unseen things, such as doing good, getting the response of good, all of these things, sometimes we are not as clear about it, or it's not so much in our face, right? But it's the same law of cause and effect, okay? Secondly, so sometimes we read about this law of karma. You've heard about the thing karma. What does karma mean? Simply, you do something, it will come back to you at some point, right? And for some faiths, if it doesn't come back to you in this world, it will come back to you in some other plane of existence, okay? Now, nothing wrong with that. However, doing good for ourselves is a lot deeper than that, okay? So let's talk about, first of all, the physical benefits. What are the physical benefits of doing good to others, okay? Now, this research comes from, so in social sciences, we know that things are now a matter of research. It's a science, right? So people do studies and they see what effect things have on people, okay? Till very recently, the effect, the study was always for people who received acts of kindness, okay? So you go somewhere, you volunteer. So what the research focused on was the people who are recipients of your kindness, what impact is it on them? However, what the scientists realized is that actually there's a lot of impact on the volunteers themselves, okay? And so the focus of the research has shifted a little bit, right? So now people are doing research on what are the benefits of people who are actually doing acts of volunteerism. So it turns out that volunteers, and of course, this, like the research studies are pretty involved, so it's, it has some depth, but I'm going to put it very, very briefly, is it causes longevity. So when they did research on women in particular, and they took a whole cohort of women of a certain age group, and what they thought they would find is that people, women with a lot of children, for example, with economic hardship, with other problems in their life, would have high stress levels and they would have physical ailments, and which is true, by the way, okay? However, with all things being equal, what they realized was that the women who volunteered, the women who gave out of their time, had a huge protective factor. So what they found was that the women who were volunteering were getting sick much less often. They had less levels of stress than one would expect in their life circumstances, okay? They were falling sick less often. So in the same group, right, people who were not volunteering, for example, were falling sick about 52% of the time in any given year, for example. And in the group that was volunteering, it was 35% or 36%. Now it seems like, okay, 15%. In research, that is a hugely significant number, okay? Another large-scale research study found that there was a 44% reduction in early death among those who volunteered a lot. This result was more than exercising 4 times a week. Now we know exercise is like the key. It's the key to health, right? And what research is showing now, that volunteering, and by the way, relationships is another one, okay? These two have a higher impact on your physical well-being. We're not even talking about anything else, right? On your physical well-being than stopping smoking and exercising. So it makes sense that we focus on it, right? That we pay attention to it. And also, it's very, very interesting that there's a hadith, I'm not, I've not got the reference in front of me, but there's a hadith which I recently read, which said that if you do ihsan, if you do good works, it prevents you from early death. So 1400 years ago, we were told the key to our well-being is to live a life of ihsan. And it's, I think we live in the most wonderful age. Why? Because science is actually catching up with spirituality. So every day science reveals one more aspect of Quran which we've had in front of us for so long, but we are now recognizing the depth and the beauty of it. Okay. There was another research study done on nuns, in a nunnery, and they said that the ones who were really engaged with their work, the ones who were feeling the positive emotions, the ones who were doing it with the right intention, they were living about 10 years longer than the other ones. Okay, so very, very huge, big, and one more very important thing, that their brain health, dementia, Alzheimer's, all of them, there was a far reduced incidence of brain, decline, which is which happens, right, in older population. That if you were engaged in some sort of giving activity, it's a huge, big protective factor. Okay, so that's on a physical level. Let's talk about mental and emotional health. So we know that, these days the big buzzword is what? Mental health. Big buzzword, right? Why? Because many, many of us are suffering from depression, from anxiety, from all sorts of things. Again, when you are engaged in volunteer activity, when you are engaged in giving to others, when you are engaged in good deeds, it creates what is called a helper's high. Completely legal halal high. Okay. Helper's high is what? So there are certain neurochemicals that are released in your bloodstream when you do good things for other people. So remember, Allah is telling us when you do ihsan, you do it for yourselves. Do we know? Do we know what this ayat means? Right? So it turns out that a few neurochemicals are released. The first very important one being oxytocin. We've heard of oxytocin. Oxytocin is when we're nursing. It creates, we have, a release of oxytocin which allows us to bond with the baby. It allows us to feel love. It allows us to feel a lot of positive emotions. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing that's released is, things that are called healing hormones. Things like endorphins, things like dopamine. Now, dopamine again is a big buzzword. What does it mean? It activates the reward centers of the brain. Let's take a very small example. Anyone addicted to chocolate? Me too, right? Why do we really like chocolate? Why do we like to to pick up our phone and check the messages, right? Because all of these things release little hormones in our brain, one of them is called dopamine, and that makes us feel good. And when it makes us feel good, we want more of it, right? And this is exactly what happens when you are helping other people, okay? So, have we heard of this fight or flight response? You've heard of that? Fight or flight means what? That we're anxious, that we want to run away, we want to fight with people, we are on guard, okay? And it's a very, not a very pleasant emotional stage to be in, okay? On the other hand, when we are helping others, we have what is called the tend and mend response, which means what? That we want to approach people, we want to build relationships, right? We want to get close to people. We are allowing others to get close to us, and we want to get close to people. Okay. So yesterday we also talked about how important ihsan is within the home, and inshallah we will come back to that. Okay. So what also research shows, and again this is a lot of many mountains of brain science that we are covering in like 5 minutes. So another thing that there is a difference between when we do something occasionally to when we do regularly. Let's take this back to Imam Hassan and Imam Hussain. Okay, remember yesterday we said that the way they live their life and the way they are role models for us, their names mean also that the quality of ihsan cannot be separated from them. That the quality of ihsan is part of their essence. Just like sugar is part of the essence, sweetness is part of the essence of sugar, that way ihsan is part of their character. Okay? Now for us, for you and me, for human beings which are trying, we sometimes do good deeds. True? And when we sometimes do good deeds, what happens is that the positive emotions, the positive impact of those things washes over us. It's like a sieve. A channi. So our brain, and there's very good reason for it, our brain is like a channi or Teflon. Teflon pans, nothing sticks to it, right? It's a Teflon for positive things. And it's actually a Velcro for negative things. Okay, and we can talk about why that is. In fact, we probably will, inshallah. The idea is that the way to change that, right, the way to get in touch with our deeper essence, the Rahmani essence that Allah has put inside us, we need to do these things on a continuous basis. We can't just do it once in a while, right? And when we do this, and that's why we called it what? The practice of ihsan. It's not something, okay, I did one good thing last year. It's not like that. When I when I am in touch with living a life of ihsan on a regular basis, then what happens is that I change the landscape of my brain. What happens is all the neurochemicals that are released in my brains on a regular basis, they will change the chemistry in my brain. So I am more positive, I am, less depressed, I am less anxious, I am living much more with the positive emotions, awe, beauty, joy, happiness, all of these things. So for parents here, we've all heard the story of Scrooge. Do you know the story of Scrooge? So who was Scrooge? What did he do? What is he famous for?
Miserly.
He was very miserly, right? And then what happened to him? He changed, okay? And when he changed, what happened? When he started giving, when he started doing things for other people, he became a happier person. True? So that's like a very, and for parents, it's a really good way to explain Ihsan and how it impacts us, because honestly, in this day and age, we're all in it. We're all tuned to the WIIFM channel. What is in it for me? Right? How is doing anything going to impact me, right? So when I know how beneficial it is, it can help me, it can motivate me. However, there is a caution. So very, very interestingly, when people did this research, what they discovered was that not everyone got the same benefits. The difference was the people who were doing it to get the benefits didn't. The ones who were doing it out of the goodness of their heart, because they felt, they had something to contribute and all of those, when they did it for the love of humanity, they actually got all of these benefits. And it comes back to the same thing that Islam has taught us. What has Islam taught us? That innamal amal binniya. That is the balance of your amal, whatever you do, it depends on the quality of intention with what you are doing it with, right? So subhanAllah, this is what science is teaching us now, that our intention can actually not only be measured, but the impact of our intention can also be measured. Isn't that beautiful? So what else does contributing, doing good things for others, what else does it give us? It helps us keep our problems in perspective. So this is another way that it adds to mental well-being. How is this? Okay, imagine, and this is something that happened to me recently, so I will share it. Imagine that you get a leak in your basement. Okay, so one fine day, you don't go in your basement very often, you go down and you notice little drips coming, and you're like me, you tend to ignore problems till they become huge, and by the time hubby comes home, there's a flood. Okay. Now, if, and yesterday we also mentioned this, that the way we live our normal lives in today's day and age is we live in a cocoon of self-absorption. That we're very tunnel vision, especially when something goes wrong, we find it very hard to find gratitude. Why? Because our problem is only, our focus is only on the problem, right? So now imagine this leak has happened, my basement is leaking, life is at an end for me. Okay, I am blowing it all out of proportion because it's a huge inconvenience, right? I'm catastrophizing it, I'm going all out. If I don't have another more important purpose, this is what my brain is going to do. This is what it's going to do. Because that's all. If my life only revolves around my home, and there's nothing wrong with that, that's not what I'm saying, right? That if I only have small problems, those small problems will become huge. How do we manage to keep our perspective? Is to take on big problems. What do we mean by that? So some people would say this is, I'm ignoring it and I'm being an ostrich and all of that, okay? Maybe, but anyway, for whatever it's worth. If I'm fighting for justice, if I'm fighting for, a food bank, if I am protesting something in the world, do you think the leak in my basement is going to impact me at the same level as opposed to if that's all there is in my life? It's not, right? Because I have other things to do. I have other places where my attention can be directed, right? So this is how also reaching out to other people, and that this is, by the way, this happens a lot and we've seen it, right? Somebody who goes through tragedy in their life, right? like a huge tragedy. You fall sick, you lose a loved one, you lose a child. The people who heal, and I don't mean get over it, I mean heal. Healing means that you mend your relationship with your grief. I'm not saying grief is over, right? Are the ones who use their grief to reach out to other people. So, if we reach out to other people, it will help us make sense of our grief. And you see so many things, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MADD. How was that formed? It was formed through personal tragedy, right? You see so many of good things that have happened in the world. Why? You see foundations and people, in our own community. You see Sabrina's tournament, which happens every single year. What a beautiful legacy, right? What a beautiful legacy. We see Iman's cupcakes, right? So people are using their grief to reach out to other people, to do good in the world despite how they are feeling, right? This is Ihsan. This is living a life of Ihsan. So, also when we are living like this, right, when we are focused on contribution, when we are focused on doing positive action, a force for good in this world, it starts what is called a virtuous cycle. What do we mean by that? So we've all heard of vicious cycle. Have you heard of a vicious cycle? So imagine you wake up in the morning, you've woken up, quote unquote, the wrong side of the bed, right? I remember Mary Poppins, right? She said that, sometimes both sides of the bed are the wrong side of the bed, right? And that always stayed with me. That when we start out the day in a really negative way, it seems to spiral down, right? If we have started the day by glaring at somebody, right, we will definitely attract more negativity into our world, right? On the other hand, when we do positive action, even it shows, what research shows is that people who are watching the positive action, their brain chemistry is changing. What is happening is they are motivated to do more good. So if you watch other people, this is how we encourage each other, right? So you watch somebody be doing good, it inspires you, you do more good, then what happens? Both of you experience the raise in the helper's high, okay? It leads you to distraction from your own worries. It contributes to good in the world. It improves the kindness, the immune system of all the people who are involved. Here's the thing, Allah is not limited. He's saying, chalo, you're doing it, I'll give it to all of you, right? This is the kind of ihsan that He deals with us. And when we do it, does this one deserve it? Should I do this? We second guess ourselves, okay? And then, after all of this is over, we create what is called a bank, a kindness bank in our brains. So every time we think about those good actions, we feel good. How beautiful is that, right? So yesterday we also mentioned that when you do ihsan, we are told in hadith that people are drawn to you, that you win hearts. Okay. So how do we win hearts? So here are some of the adab of doing ihsan. These recommendations come from a combination of two hadiths, and they're very similar, both the hadiths, and they are attributed to Imam Musa Kazim alayhi salam and Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam. What this hadith says is that a good deed done to a fellow believer is not considered complete until these things happen. Okay, so in other words, it actually gives us a checklist. It gives us a checklist. If you're doing good, this is what you should be aware of. First of all, that we have to underestimate the act. So the person who is doing the act of kindness needs to undervalue it. Okay. What this means is, and by the way, this Imam Ali alayhi salam reminds us a lot about this, about the muttaqeen, right? They say, he says that when they do something good, they always belittle it. They consider it very little. But when they do something wrong, they consider it very big. In other words, we have a very high standard for ourselves. Normally, we have very high standards for other people, right? But what Hadith and the Quran and our faith tells us is that for our own actions, we have a very high standard. Okay. Now, a few things to consider. Okay. When we are clear that everything that we've been given, ability, resources, gifts in terms of talents, whether it's money, whether it is whatever ability, you can speak, you can write, you can produce, you can cook well, you can do flower arranging, whatever it may be, right? Is this ours? No. It has been given from whom? From the biggest Mohsin, right? He has done this ihsan. So first of all, we are just custodians of it. This has never come from us, okay? Now, if we have something and somebody else needs it and we give it to them, what's the big deal? And not only that, but we're not even giving it for free because we're getting so many things in return. You know, we're getting physical benefits, mental benefits, emotional benefits, spiritual benefits, benefits in this world, benefits in the hereafter. So why would we overestimate it, right? And sometimes I think as women, we really need to remind ourselves of this, don't we? Why? Because when we do something good, we hold on to it. I did this for this one. We may not say it, but what happens is that we have this feeling that people are not appreciating, don't we? And when we feel like that, again, it's not something to put us down. It's human. It's human to feel like that. But take it as an opportunity to remind ourselves of what? Of His ihsan, of what we have been given, and how we can keep the cycle in flow, right? How we can keep the gifts in flow rather than hoard. When we hoard, again, it's a tunnel, it's constriction. We feel small. When we're giving out, when our hands are open, we feel, obviously if we feel big, we feel expansion, our hearts expand. So we feel better about life, okay? Also, you know, in terms of other people, the recipients, right? Do you like to ask people who consider what they're doing for you a big thing? Do you like to ask them? No. Why? Because, you know, and again, this is, you know, God is just so mercifully beautiful, right? He cares about our dignity so much that He does not want anyone to feel obligated to another human being. Because He really cares about how we feel inside. I mean, you know, I keep going back to the story of Musa. If we look at it in one way, and this is not our topic, but if we really look at the story of Musa in one way, Allah changed the history of the world to provide comfort to a mother's heart. Right? This is who we are dealing with. Okay? So if we do something and we give it up, like literally give it up in the sense done and forgotten, right? Who are we giving it to? Who are we dealing with? We are dealing with the utmost Mohsin on this planet, not beyond this planet, right? So, again, you know, so what this hadith tells us, that when we consider it very little, the person who will receive it will be happy. They will not feel this idea that, you know, that they are causing you inconvenience. Nobody wants to cause anyone else inconvenience, right? And there are so many examples, like, you know, I literally reflect on this. Reflect on it in your own life, that when you have reached out to people who, when they have helped you, they've actually acted as if you're doing them a favor. Isn't it? This is how our volunteers are. They actually thank us for allowing them to help us. The second thing is, we need to conceal it. Conceal it means what? You don't go and tell every single person, you know, when she was down and out, this is how I helped her. Okay. Why? Why shouldn't we do that? Again, no harm. Okay, if you told people, you've still done the good deed, right? But remember, what Allah tells us is that when we're going for things in the world, we will get that. You know, if the reason why we're doing it so that we look good, so that people tell us, wah, wah, we will definitely get that. But at what cost? At what cost? Then we've already got our reward, right? If we are dealing only with Allah in secrecy, if nobody else knows what we're doing, can you imagine the benefits? Like we are literally banking with, you know, with the most generous one, right? Now, also, obviously it's hard on, again, the dignity of the person who's receiving if many people know that they are helped, okay? And this is, it's for people who are in the helping professions, this is a very, very important part, so for years, as many people know, we've been involved with JSS, right? And for us to actually keep what we do private and confidential is probably the biggest jihad of doing this work. Because people want to know. They want to know who's coming, why are they coming, are they in financial trouble, right? So if we were all to literally look away, and instead of looking at who is in trouble, literally, have this intention, how can I help people who are in trouble without knowing? It's not going to improve our lives if we know the names of people who are in trouble. Honestly, it's not going to improve our lives, right? Now, obviously, the thing about concealing is that when, so the way Allah deals with it is that Allah spreads it. So if you do anything good, even if you do one bit, He will spread it, So people will find out that you've done something. And then it becomes a challenge. So when you are doing good in public, not that you don't do it, but it is a challenge. Why? Because then you have to question your intention all the time. You have to question your intention. Are you doing it for the people? It's much, much harder to keep your intention pure when there are other people in the mix. That's why, we're told why Namaz-e-Shab is such a beautiful act. Why? Because it's completely private between the beloved and the lover. Completely, right? So, moving on. What else? Hastening is completion. Do tajeel. Tajeel means hurry up. If somebody asks you for something, don't make, sometimes we have these, of people in power. You read about them, despots, for example, right? They would make people wait to gain something from them, right? There would be a long waiting list. But the way we are told to do ihsan is that if somebody asks you, do it as soon as possible. Why? Because again, to maintain the dignity of the other person. When they have reached out, it's very, very hard for them to be then waiting for your mercy, waiting for your pleasure, waiting for your convenience. Okay. So do it as soon as you can. Also, obviously we all know this, don't oblige them. This is the biggest thing. Allah tells us in the Quran that you can, no matter how much charity you give, if you make the person do manna or azza, means two things, right? What? If you tell them off, like if you make them feel bad about asking, or if you're contemptuous towards them for some reason, you've destroyed everything. It's literally, there's much, much written on this and we can't really go into it. But really, it's a very, very serious thing. When you've done something, literally forget. Do it and forget. Up to Him to keep account. One of the most beautiful surahs, what is the most beautiful part of the surah is Surah Mutaffifin. Okay, now Surah Mutaffifin talks about the people who measure out. It's a thing about, every business owner should read it, right? That when they measure out, people who are not believers, who are not strong in their belief, when they measure out, they are very careful that they should not give a little bit more than what is thing. And when they want to receive, they're very focused on what's owed to them. And remember yesterday we talked about how this thing about owing and rights and responsibilities in our homes, for example, right? This whole thing about I know my rights and you know your rights and all of this, it has landed us into a lot of trouble. Right? And the way to improve relationships and to really go far and wide is again to deal with ihsan. So when we do something, when we are on the giving end, literally forget about it. When you owe something to someone, that's when you should be careful. That's when we need to remember, that I owe this person something, whether it's an apology or something that I borrowed from them or whatever, right? So don't remind them that you were in trouble and still you did something good for them. there's a beautiful narration from Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam. When he used to give charity, when he would give someone money, he would kiss it. Right? Why would he kiss it? Because he would have this idea of honoring the other person. That you are actually relieving me of my obligation. Because if there's no one to ask us, if there's no one who is needed, and we experience this living in the West, right? We have to be a lot more mindful. When you're living in the East, you don't need to do anything. You just go out in the car, you roll down your windows and you can give, right? Here, you can't do that. You actually have to go looking for people. So people who are relieving you of your obligation to give, they are actually doing an ihsan to us, okay? And that's the kind of mentality that the Aimma are asking for to have on us, okay? So what is the result of all of this, right? Of understanding, of concealing it, of hastening towards it. So the hadith continues, he who underestimates his good turn to a fellow believer has esteemed his brother highly. In other words, you maintain the honor of the other person. Whereas he who esteems his good turn to be great has deemed his brother to be insignificant. Okay? He who conceals the good turn that he has done has honored his action, and he who hastens to fulfill his promise takes pleasure in the gift too. But just I'd like to end with this narration of from Imam Ali alayhi salam, where he says to be good in this world, to be in this world is nothing, right? And you know how he talks about the dunya, right? So it's not good except for two types of people. Someone that every day is doing more good actions than ihsan, and another one who is not doing that or who recognizes his shortcomings and who is in a state of tawbah. So what Imam is telling us that either we are in a state of ihsan or we recognize our shortcomings and we do tawbah. So this is how, again, the pursuit, so coming back to the title of our topic, right? The pursuit of ihsan means that these are the kind of role models that we have been given to emulate. This is what we are working towards. And the practice means that this is something that we do every single day and not just once in a while.